Elite Force released in 2000 and was considered one of the best Star Trek games ever made, but that was the PC version. The PS2 port received negative reviews across the board, but I like to form my own opinion, so I decided to play it to find out how bad was Star Trek Elite Forces actually. Elite Force is set within the Star Trek universe, created by Gene Roddenberry back in the 1960s. The original show premiered in September 1966 and followed the journey of a crew on board the starship USS Enterprise. Their mission was a simple one. They would explore strange new worlds, seek out new life and civilizations, and of course boldly go where no man has gone before. Elite Force was tied into the fifth iteration of the TV series in Star Trek Voyager. This series followed a Starfleet crew aboard the USS Voyager that's trying to return home after being stranded on the other side of the galaxy. Voyager is also special because the ship is led by Captain Janeway, who we all know is the best fucking captain in the entire franchise, followed closely by Jean-Luc. But you're not here for the history of Star Trek, so let's explore the premise of Elite Force. The game's protagonist is Ensign Alex Monroe, who's a member of the newly forged Hazard Team. The Hazard Team was created to deal with dangerous and hostile missions outside of the Voyager. Now this is an ideal scenario for the new team, as the Voyager becomes trapped in a starship graveyard, heavily damaged and under attack from multiple hostile factions. It'll be down to Monroe and the Hazard Team to protect the Voyager and investigate the cause of their entrapment. That's all you need to know for now, but we'll cover the game's story in detail later in the video. Let's look at the game's visuals, and I'll start with the graphics. I thought the game looked pretty good. The character models were designed well, and you could clearly differentiate between the main cast, whether that was Tuvok, 7 of 9, or even that scumbag Neelix. The only model that looked off was Janeway, which is baffling as you'd think they want her model to look as accurate as possible. Every time I saw her in a cutscene, it was a slap in the face to the captain. The level design also looked good, but these pale in comparison to the parts on the Voyager. The devs wanted players to feel like they were on the ship, so they recreated the Voyager levels based on the actual layout from the series. The bridge, sickbay, holodecks and more were all accurately represented. The particle effects when shooting a weapon, their idle animation as well as enemies' death animations also looked good. It was satisfying watching enemies get disintegrated with my phaser or compression rifle, which came in a 40-watt range. But yes, it's pretty much a neon light show whenever you're firing at enemies, and I had plenty of time for that. The smaller details that create immersion are also present, the lip syncing being one of them. For a game that released 25 years ago, they did a good job syncing the audio.
We responded to a distress signal from a derelict vessel and it opened fire.
Crewmates will turn their heads when you're moving, which I don't even see in some modern titles. Also, I like the animations of the crew getting beamed up to the ship. It just looked pretty cool. For those that watch this series, you'll appreciate these small details, and if you're new to the franchise, you'll just think it looked good. Yes, the game does look like an older title for obvious reasons, but the graphics haven't aged poorly. You must also factor in that the game's graphics were taken down a notch to run on the PS2. This resulted in more blurring on textures, more aliasing, and visual effects like lighting and shadows being toned down. But this was to be expected and something that we can all understand. But there is something that I couldn't understand and a part of the visuals that all gamers hate. When it happens, we get pissed off and immediately take to Reddit to check if it's happening to anyone else. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm of course talking about the frame rate. Elite Force's target frame rate is 30 FPS, although it would never maintain it. The game would dip as low as 11 FPS when there were several enemies or animations on the screen. 11 FPS is obviously horrific, but it got so bad in the game at times that 15 FPS was a miracle sent from the heavens. Ironically, the loading screens maintained a whopping 50 frames per second, which was smart as you're going to be seeing this screen an awful lot. We'll touch on the game's performance a bit later in the video, but up next is Elite Force's sound design. The biggest asset of Elite Force's sound design is its voiceover work. All the actors from the series reprised their role in the game by voicing their characters.
No, the Etherians had no detailed information about it. For all we know, it could be a simple machine.
The only actor that didn't was Jerry Ryan, who played 7 of 9, but her voice was later added in a patch. The voiceovers were fantastic. It sounds as though you're watching an episode from the series. None of the actors half-assed their lines either. They were taking their role seriously, which is to be expected.
If you ask me, you're in line for a promotion.
The background music in each level is reminiscent of what you'd hear in the series. It stays true to the source material and gives you that Star Trek vibe. The The music was composed by Kevin Schilder, who worked on Quake 4, the Hexen series as well as Black Ops. The game's secondary composer was Danny Pelfrey, who's worked on Fallout 3, The Simpsons as well as several other Star Trek entries. It's safe to say Raven Software didn't cheap out on the music either. And yes, you heard me correctly, Raven developed Elite Force, although they weren't responsible for the port. The music cut out during some cutscenes and resumed playing shortly after.
The Forge could send another harvester ship.
All the more reason to get repairs done sooner.
I wouldn't say this was game breaking, but I did notice every single time it happened. The other sound effects like shooting your weapon, explosions and enemies all sounded fine. I'm not going to break these down in detail, but I'll finish by saying the sound design team did a good job. But sound design alone doesn't mean this was a good port, so it makes sense that we look at Elite Force's gameplay mechanics next. We'll start off with the game's controls, which were terrible at times. Elite Force was originally designed for mouse and keyboard, so Pipe Dream added an auto-aim feature to assist with targeting enemies. Pipe Dream were the devs responsible for the port, by the way. Now the auto-aim feature was horrendous for the most part. It would be too floaty, and your reticle would be all over the place. It was so bad that I had to stop moving to shoot enemies, which felt counterintuitive. Elite Force is supposed to play like Quake, Doom and Wolfenstein. Hell, it was built using the same engine. I had to adjust the view speeds of the camera several times during the playthrough, and it never felt good to move around and shoot enemies. How they made the movement so bad for the port when Raven smashed it out of the park on the PC version, I'll never know. It's like they didn't test the feature out or didn't have time to configure it correctly. I eventually got more used to the control scheme, but that doesn't make it good. Quake 3 released on the PS2 using the same engine, and the controls in that game were fine. There's a health and armor system, and these can be replenished at the appropriate stations, which are scattered throughout each level. I was confused as to what the armor did initially, as your health goes down at the same time as your armor. Now armor lessens the amount of damage that you take to your health, and when it's gone, you're susceptible to taking even more damage. If your health is depleted, you'll die, and you can reload from your last save. Fortunately, you can save as much as you want, so if you save often, you'll barely lose any progress. Unfortunately, Elite Force has the longest load times I've ever seen, which is made even worse due to the amount of loading that is required. Spawn into a new area, that's a loading screen. Dying in the field, that's a loading screen. Using the turbo lift on the Voyager, oh you better believe that's a loading screen. An aspect of the game I enjoyed was the weapon arsenal you've got access to. There's the phaser compression rifle, grenade launcher, stasis weapon and Romulan disruptor to name a few. They were all fun to use, with some of them being slightly better than others. Now what made the weapons even better is their alternative firing mode. Every weapon has two ways to fire them. The stasis weapon for example can fire one burst of energy or multiple to hit several enemies. The phaser and phaser rifle secondary mode can straight up disintegrate enemies. Now this was fucking cool, I did not get tired of this, and the death animation was the cherry on top. There were a few occasions when I depleted all of my ammo, but fortunately the phaser has unlimited ammo reserves, but you must wait for it to recharge. Whilst it was a pain in the arse when you have no ammo left, I was thankful to have the phaser as opposed to nothing at all. The fun of the game is all dependent on its frame rate, which I previously mentioned can drop down to 11 FPS. Now when there's no enemies nearby, you have less crew members with you, or there's not much happening in the level, the game can hover around the 25 FPS mark, but this is rare. As soon as some explosions start going off or multiple enemies hit the screen, you can expect your fun to go soft. I could deal with the low frame rate, but on the occasions it hovered around the 11 mark, it became unplayable. You'll have to deal with slowdown, stuttering and a naturally low frame rate. Elite Force has 30 linear levels that form part of 8 main missions. Now each mission has an objective, like escorting an ally through hostile environments, retrieving items and destroying ships and station components. You can view your objectives at any time by looking at your tricorder, and this also provided some subtle clues and hints as to what you need to do next, or an enemy's weakness. Your crewmates will also give you verbal hints as to where you need to go next.
Looks like they need you up in the loading dock. We've got this under control now.
What also surprised me is that NPCs will have a full-blown conversation as if you're not there.
Gina, watch your alignment. That isodyne array has to be modulated to exactly 4.7 microjoules.
Now for a game that released 25 years ago, I thought that was a cool feature. Now that I've said some nice things about the AI, it's time to stab them in the back. Like when Janeway erased the Doctor's memory in Season 5 Episode 11. You'll typically have one or more crewmates accompanying you throughout each level. Although they're not the most dependable. They'll shoot at walls, stand around and do nothing, or completely bug out and get stuck in doorways. To make things worse, your teammates will constantly run in your line of sight whilst you're trying to kill enemies. They'll then complain that you're shooting them even though they run in front of my bullets. If you do too much damage to a crewmate, everyone else will turn on you. Here I accidentally shot someone and they started firing their phasers at me. My finger slipped, you arseholes, there was no need for further bloodshed. Some crew members are expendable though. As you can see, this guy got smoked. Unfortunately for him, this isn't the holodeck, so that explosion wasn't a simulation. The enemies aren't getting off the hook either. Sometimes they would run menacingly at you in a straight line. This was quite a strange tactic, and I can only imagine the conversation they had prior. Captain, how should we engage in combat with Starfleet? Well, we're going to run directly at them in a straight line. Should we also fire our weapons? I didn't say anything about firing weapons, kid. There are several enemy factions you'll run into that are also in this series. You've got the Borg, who will adapt to your weapons, meaning you'll have to switch to another. There are Scavengers, who are a bunch of alien raiders, and Hirogen, who are hunters that use cloaking and energy weapons. Like a certain creature that was in a game I reviewed recently. There are several more enemy types throughout the game, which offered a good amount of variety. It didn't feel like I was constantly fighting the same enemies, although their AI was questionable at times. The grenade launcher was a great weapon that could destroy large packs of enemies. Apart from this one Klingon, the grenade bounced straight off his head as if I was using a wiffle ball. The gameplay was a mixed bag. Sometimes you'd get an acceptable level of performance and the game would be enjoyable, but you'd equally experience lag, slowdown, and bugs that reminded me the game was ported badly. The inclusion of the holodeck missions was cool, and you could fight against simulated enemies. Here I fought in Camelot doing battle against archers with crossbows, but this made me remember that content had been cut from the PS2 port. You see, several missions were cut from the port, with sequences, NPCs, and puzzles being removed entirely. HoloMatch was also removed, which was the game's multiplayer mode. Yes, I know online gaming wasn't huge on the PS2, so the port received a downgraded version. The port featured a 2-player split screen mode, which was supposed to facilitate 4 players, but the final product only supported 2. Only 2 game modes in Deathmatch and Team Deathmatch were added, and the maps are halved with only 10 being accessible, as opposed to the 20 plus on PC. Right, that's enough talk of gameplay. We'll summarise our findings later in the video, but up next is the game's difficulty. Hey guys, Senor Donut here, obviously. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. Thank you. Now back to the video. Elite Force has 3 difficulty settings to choose from, in easy, normal and hard. Now I played on normal, which I assume is what most players went for. Enemies will try and seek cover more often when they're not running at you in a straight line, as well as using more grenades. Ammo and health stations are quite plentiful, but at times I found myself without ammo and having to use my phaser. This wasn't too big of a deal, as it was only a matter of time before you ran into an ammo crate or energy station. At most you'd have one encounter having to use your phaser, which whilst not ideal, didn't dampen the experience. Now the number of enemies stays the same regardless of the difficulty you choose. The enemy's AI and health number will be adjusted, but that's pretty much it when it comes to the difficulty variables. On normal difficulty, this game won't present many of you with a challenge, but the control system will. The auto-aim feature that was added to the port feels like it's actively working against you. When moving to the left or right, your reticle doesn't slow down and stick to enemies enough, which makes the controls feel floaty. The best way I can describe it is one that PC players will be able to understand. PC gamers typically don't have aim assist, as the controls of a keyboard and mouse are far more precise than a controller. If you were to use your controller on a PC FPS, it only makes sense to turn aim assist on. Elite Force feels like you're playing a PC game with a controller, but the aim assist is still turned off. I've played FPS games my whole life, with Black Ops 6 and Borderlands 4 being my go-tos at the moment. I know what good controls feel like, and this ain't it. Despite the game not being difficult, I still managed to die quite a few times. Now some of you may be saying that's a contradiction, and I would agree, so let me explain. Your AI companions are a certain word that starts with R that I'm not allowed to say anymore. Okay, there are most of the weapons in the game cause splash damage, which will hurt you if caught in the blast. Your crewmates will run in front of you when shooting enemies, and because they're so close, you'll take splash damage and leave yourself one shot or potentially dead. Most of my deaths were caused by my suicidal crewmates running in front of me, and then there being no healing stations left. This would leave me one shot, and I'd eventually get sent back to Lumbridge. This was a pain in the arse, because you'd get stuck with the 1 minute plus loading screen. The only caveat was that you could save as often as you'd like, as there wasn't wasn't a conventional checkpoint system. However, you can unintentionally fuck yourself over if you're not careful with the save system. I'd made a save where I was one shot and couldn't get past a group of enemies without getting hit. If I hadn't made a backup save, I would have had to restart the entire game. Admittedly, this is a me problem and a reminder to save wisely. I've touched on the FPS drops and the stuttering in the visual section, so I'll keep this segment short. The lag doesn't really make the game more difficult, but it does make it more tedious. The last thing you want is the game to lag when you're getting shot at from multiple angles. The game is made slightly more challenging due to your crewmate's bad AI, as well as the poor control scheme. If the game had more polish, we may be discussing Elite Force in a different light. But we're not ready to conclude the video yet, guys. The game does have a shining light. Up next, we'll look at Elite Force's story.
Alright, let's go.
As I'll be uncovering the plot, there will be some spoilers. This will also be quite detailed, so I understand if you want to skip this section. If you don't want to be spoiled or don't care about the story, then go to this timestamp in the video. This is your last chance. Okay, here we go. The story begins with the newly appointed Hazard team carrying out a mission on a Borg ship. Ensign Monroe needs to rescue his teammates as well as reclaim the iMod weapon. The Borg's protective shields can't protect them from the iMod, so obtaining it is a must. However, the team manages to get captured by the Borg and Ensign Monroe blows up the ship whilst trying to rescue them.
No, wait, don't!
This would be the end of the game, except this was all a training exercise based on the holodeck. Monroe gets an absolute bollocking from Tuvok for his poor decision making, and you can't even blame him.
Mr. Monroe, your tactical approach was, shall we say, tactless.
Instead of trying to use the panel to release his crewmates from their cells, he shoots it with his phaser. Shortly after the training exercise, the Voyager is attacked by an unidentified ship. The Voyager fights back and destroys the enemy vessel, but at the cost of the Voyager sustaining heavy damage. When the ship blows up, it teleports the now stationary Voyager to another location, surrounded by derelict ships. The crew attempt to repair the Voyager, but are raided by a group of scavengers composed of Klingons and Marlins. This was pretty much a waste of time, as all of them are killed and their best attack was hitting me with frame drops. Tuvok identifies an abandoned ship nearby that has a functioning power source. He believes if the computer system is still active, they can retrieve information on where they are and how they can escape the ship graveyard. This is the perfect job for the newly appointed Hazard team. You know, the guys that blew up the ship in the holodeck exercise. They beam onto the ship, which looks like it could be in an Avatar movie. They're then attacked by some strange flying aliens who charge straight at you in a straight line. After killing a platoon of these aliens, it's revealed that they're Etherians, and this whole situation has been a misunderstanding.
You invade us, believed you were the others, tried to contact you. Communication methods very different. You attack us.
They were trying to communicate with the Hazard team, so the combat is waved off and their leader allows us to access their database. But hold on a second, it didn't look like they were trying to communicate with me. They were clearly attacking us, my health even went down. They also captured my crewmates and put them in alien pods against their will. But yeah, this is all a big misunderstanding. The Etherians reveal there's a giant space station called the Forge that is draining power and preventing repairs from being completed on the Voyager. This is the same reason why several other ships are also stuck and why the location is referred to as the ship graveyard. B'Elanna believes that a substance called isodecium will help in getting the Voyager back online, as it isn't affected by the Forge's draining effects. The Etherians' intel shows there is some isodecium nearby, but it's on the Scavenger's base of operations. Now these are the same people that raided the Voyager earlier in the game, being made up of Klingons and Malans. The Hazard team is deployed and sent to steal the isodecium from the Scavengers. Whilst they are successful, Telsia gets captured and Odell is seriously wounded. Take a look at this scene where Telsia is captured. The Scavenger pauses before walking into the room as if he was an actor that entered the set too quickly. It was as awkward as the Stormtrooper walking into a door in episode 4, but all is well as we manage to get Telsia back and make it to the extraction point with the isodecium. Surely at this point we can beam back to the Voyager, fix the ship and be on our way. Well, that was the plan until the Borg showed up.
Borg!
Oh, right.
This crew member gets barged into and sent flying. I guess that Borg has been hitting the gym, as this gentle push kills him.
Oh my god. He's dead.
I was considering barging into the rest of the enemies in the game, as the push DPS was clearly OP. The lieutenant of the Hazard team, Foster, gets captured, and the Borg also make off with the Isodecium. Monroe is made team leader of the Hazard team, as Lieutenant Foster was captured by the Borg. The team then transports to the Borg cube, accompanied by 7 of 9, to take back the Isodecium. And if you're not counting, the Isodecium has changed hands more than a bag of coke on a night out with your mates. The Hazard team stole it from the scavengers, the Borg stole it from us, and now we're re-stealing it from the Borg. Whilst on the cube, the crew is surrounded by the Borg, as well as Lieutenant Foster, who's been assimilated, baby. The Borg makes Monroe an offer. They'll let us escape with the Isodecium to eradicate an alien species called 8472. Now, species 8472 have infested the Borg cube and are resistant to their technology, like using quick attack on a Geodude. The team takes out species 8472, and we cross paths again with the Borg, but this isn't a regular cross, this is a double cross, as they try and go back on our deal. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I don't like being fucked. We shook hands on a deal.
All right, we'll do it.
So what's all this talk about assimilation?
You will be assimilated.
Monroe had a hunch the Borg would go back on their deal, so he ordered Chang to plant an explosive earlier in the mission. Also, did they really have to call this guy Chang? There's like a million names they could have gave him, yet they went with Chang. That's all I'm saying. The bomb goes off, causing serious damage to the cube, and we're beamed back to the Voyager just in time, with the Isodecium, might I add. With the Hazard team back on board the Voyager, the Isodecium is used to repair the ship, which will be operational in a couple of days. The crew then notice debris coming towards the ship, which upon closer inspection turns out to be a ship. How a crew that is constantly in space can't differentiate between debris and a ship, I'll never know. Now, the ship coming towards the Voyager has been dispatched by the Vorge to tear the Voyager apart for resources. To counteract this, the Hazard team travels to a derelict gunship nearby that has the firepower to destroy the enemy vessel before it makes contact. Whilst on board the gunship, the Forge vessel makes contact with Voyager. Before it tears the ship apart, Monroe fires a projectile which hits the Forge vessel head on. Now, the Forge ship manages to connect to the Voyager, but fortunately the projectile managed to disable it. Despite the Forge ship being disabled, the alien crew on board manages to swarm the Voyager, but they're quickly dispatched. The aliens causing havoc on the Voyager are a bunch of oversized crabs. Now, I got stuck in a ledge in this area, which meant I could shoot the crabs from a distance, and they couldn't even hit me. Bring it on! Now, some would say I was cheesing the crabs, whilst I would say I was using the high ground like Obi-Wan. Monroe has a plan that will see the Hazard team use the Forge vessel that attacked them to infiltrate the Forge mothership.
I can take a small team of my best people. We use the Harvester to enter the Forge and lower its defenses so you can send reinforcements and shuttles.
This will allow them to disable its defensive systems to lead a counterattack. A crew member gets killed during a battle, but I'm sure this wouldn't have happened if everyone was paying attention. Chell stops firing his weapon to give everyone a pep talk. But if you just kept firing at the enemies, Beastmen may have lived. Also, why are the aliens firing at Beastmen? There's like 3 more of us slightly to the left. It's like getting tunneled off the hook in DBD, they weren't interested in the other survivors. Monroe destroys the Forge's core, which disables the dampening field. The field is what prevented the Voyager from moving, in case you've forgotten. Now, the Forge's station is unstable due to the core being destroyed, so it makes sense to evacuate back to the Voyager. However, Monroe learns of the species controlling the Vorge, referred to as the Vorsov. Even if the station is destroyed, the Vorsov will still be able to spread. Their goal is to harvest organic life forms to create an army that will conquer the galaxy. This guy was basically the Hitler of Star Trek without the shitty little square mustache. Monroe's orders are to evacuate the station immediately, but he defies Tuvok's orders and takes on the Vorsov commander.
Ensign Monroe. Ensign Monroe, acknowledge. Mr. Monroe, you are violating direct orders.
This guy had some bullshit attacks that deleted my health bar, but that's beside the point. The Vorsov commander is defeated and Monroe manages to beam off the station just before it blows up. The Voyager, which is now operational, manages to escape the blast as well as some other ships in the graveyard. One of the ships that made it out was the Etherians. You know, the guys that attacked us that said it was all a misunderstanding. Monroe is promoted to lieutenant and Janeway mentions that Starfleet may adopt the use of the Hazard team going forward.
Those pips suit you well, Lieutenant.
The Hazard team has proven to be more valuable than we imagined. Starfleet just might adopt your idea when we get back, Tuvok.
Were they paving way for a sequel? Tuvok can't help but show his pride in choosing Monroe for the job, but as a Vulcan, you know emotions aren't part of their repertoire. Everyone laughs at Tuvok, which would get reported to HR in 2025.
Why, Tuvok? Is that a bit of pride I detect?
Surely, Captain. There is no cause to insult me.
And that concludes Elite Force's story. The story of Elite Force was excellent. It seems like a playable episode from the series, which is the biggest compliment I can give it. The cutscenes, voice acting and the overall plot are the biggest selling points of the port. Michael Gummout wrote the game's plot, and he also wrote the scripts for the Star Wars Jedi Knight series. Now, despite the game's shortcomings in certain areas, the plot was the PS2 version's saving grace. We're coming to the end of the video, and I have a question that needs to be answered, which is of course, how bad was Star Trek Voyager Elite Force actually? The game's control scheme was implemented poorly. It felt as though you were doing battle with the reticule to make it stick to enemies. The performance was even worse at times, with frame drops, stuttering and slowdown being prevalent, and I'll point out again that the game dropped to 11 FPS at times. Star Fox released on the SNES in 1993 and maintained a frame rate of 10 to 15 FPS, but that was impressive at the time considering the implementation of 3D polygons. So what was the devs' excuse with Elite Force? The best aspect of Elite Force was the story. As a Star Trek fan, I own the entire Voyager, Deep Space Nine and Next Generation series, although I chose not to pick up Enterprise. I'm saying this because I've seen a lot of episodes, and this game feels like you're playing in one. The choice to use the actors from the series to reprise their roles in the game was a wise one. They all gave stellar performances, which adds to the level of immersion. Visually, the game looks great, despite the graphics being downgraded due to the PS2's hardware limitation. Everything that's good about the game was already present on the PC version, developed by Raven Software. Now, the PC version was fantastic, with most criticisms pointing at its short story. Pipe Dream, the devs behind the PS2 port, managed to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. They were literally given a piece of dilithium and managed to turn it into a piece of quartz. But it would be disingenuous if I said I didn't have fun at times. The story, characters and combat, when it worked, were enjoyable. But overall, the clean pair of boxes that Raven developed turned into a skid mark when given to Pipe Dream. So to answer the question, yes, the PS2 port of Elite Force was pretty bad, actually.